Dionysus, the god of nature, twice born, first of woman, then of his father's thigh, god of wine, allower of sexual pleasure, bringer of the mysterious rites, bringer of an illusion so total that it becomes the harbinger of the reality it brings. In Macedonia, he was known as Euripides, meaning completely hidden. Thought in some versions of the myth to be of Thracian, Phrygian origin, he is a god born outside of Greece, a mysterious stranger come to Hellas. Enough of philosophy, enough of reason. I'm tired of answering the objections of the sophists and politicians. I want to quote Walt Whitman. I want to run naked through the neighborhood next full moon at midnight. No, I tell myself, can't do that. That would be irrational. People would think I'm crazy. I might end up in a psych ward, and I don't want that. And so I don't worship with the Bacchae. Not anymore, like I once did. Once or twice, actually, back in college, when I was a degenerate. Degeneracy. The internet right wing loves to use that term, don't they? They love to call it out, to proclaim degeneracy, the ruin of civilization. The internet right wing loves to imagine a moral legalism where we can ban all sorts of sexual sin, and behaviors now called degenerate are banished by a series of draconian legal reforms. But maybe you've participated in an informal bacchanal at some point in your life. There are always barrels of wine there and people wearing comfortable, loose clothes, and somehow the pheromones are almost visibly perceptible. Women wear their hair down. A real bacchanal is always outside at night, and there's ivy and festivities and the scent of pine. We worship Bacchus when we are in touch with nature, when we let our locks fall down alongside our cheeks, when we dance. Then, whenever we have indulged and allowed, right? When we have given permission, when we have gone with nature, rather than seeking to box it in, to proscribe nature. But then we keep going, and the dance becomes wilder, and we begin to sweat, and now it's almost all women, and pretty soon they're tearing apart bulls with bare hands and worshiping Dionysus, eating the raw flesh, and "Why don't you join us?" they howl. "Here, pull at the flesh yourself." And then, "Who's that in the treetops?" one of them cries out. "Pelt him with stones, pull him down, he's a spy. He will share our secrets, tear him apart, take his head." Dionysus will not be denied his godhead. Dionysus is the suffering god. Dionysus is tragedy itself. Indeed, his own festival was the festival during which all these great plays were put on. The Bacchae is a tragedy about tragedy. Nietzsche said in The Birth of Tragedy that Euripides brought tragedy to an end, or that tragedy killed itself in Euripides. What could all this mean? What does it mean that Dionysus, the spirit of tragedy, somehow will not be denied his godhead, or his reality? Is it possible these plays were intended to force on people the idea of the reality of suffering? The central feature of the Dionysus cult, just as with Christianity, was the idea of the suffering of the god. It is as if we are shown a great drama involving the suffering of reality itself in order that we never forget it. And so is there something about meditating on suffering and tragedy that protects us from some even worse condition? I guess, like, imagine the utopians, the planners, the progressives, the perfecters of mankind, maybe. And maybe some sort of meditation on this suffering God and on tragedy itself can protect us from them. Okay, deep breath. Let me come down to earth a little bit now. Why don't you watch this clip before you leave? Ready?
Circumstances determine all events, and they even determine how we perceive the divine world. And Euripides, the playwright, was profoundly influenced by these currents, and his plays again and again question traditional perceptions of right and wrong, of what is normal and what is abnormal, of what is excessive. And in his very last play, he asked, what makes a god?
Πιο φωτεινός και πιο καθάριος τώρα.
Η ταραχή κατέχει την ψυχή σου ακόμη.
Τι λες να νιώθω?
And how do we know what a god is?
You don't even know who you are.
I am Pentheus, son of Agave and Achaeon.
Nietzsche believed that Greek culture started to go wrong when the Greeks tried to forget about Dionysus. They became too Apollonian, because of philosophy in general and Socrates in particular. With the arrival of Socrates on the scene, the Greeks fell in love with the idea of being able to control everything through their minds, being totally wise and able to understand everything.
Αλλά το μυαλό μου κάπως καθαρίζει. Αισθάνομαι να επιστρέφω.
Αν τώρα μ' ακούς, μπορείς και να απαντήσεις καθαρά.
So I am the son of God by a mortal woman, do you understand that? And I was literally brought back from the dead, being snatched out of his thigh. And I grew up and traveled far, all the way out to India, and now I have come back to Greece, having traversed the plains of Persia, having traversed the land of the Thracians, and I have come now to bring my worship to Greece. And I want to start it right here in my hometown of Thebes.
Πατέρα, τώρα τι λέγαμε πριν, το ξέχασα.
Μετά το γάμο σου που πήγες,
Μ' έδωσες νύφη στον Αιχίωνα. Της γης το τέκνο.
και χάρισες παιδί στον άντρα σου. Ποιο?
Σμίξαμε. Και καρπός μας, ο Pentheus.
They turned against drinking, wine, and unreason. Nietzsche argued that this was deeply dangerous, and that real wisdom comes from accepting the Dionysian side of us.
Pentheus arrives on the scene and says, what in the world is going on? I have reports of absolute disorder in the city that I must govern. I hear my own mother is out roaming the woods with this bunch of promiscuous women, doing all sorts of deeds, dishonoring their husbands' deads. What is going on?
Ποιο πρόσωπο στην αγκαλιά σου έχεις?
Λιονταριού! Είπανε του κυνηγιού οι συντρόφισσες.
Κοίτα καλύτερα. Στρέψε το βλέμμα σου.
αδερφή μου.
Ελέγξε το για να το μάθεις καθαρά.
They tore Pentheus into pieces? Yes, in their mad fury. They tore him into pieces.
Πόνο βλέπω ανίποτο.
Pentheus. Sorrow. How appropriate. Take him away! Lock him up in the stables. Give him all the darkness he wants. You do your dancing in there. I'm ready. But the god Dionysus, whose existence you deny, will make you pay for this outrage. In wronging me, you put the god in chains.
What is going on?
That's the mindset, isn't it? That's the mindset. Dionysus. But it can't be only that simple. I mean, there are lots of layers to this myth. Dionysus appears in Thebes, in Euripides' version, embodied as a mere human. He pretends to be a priest of the Dionysus cult, so a priest of his own, god. But he appears to some of the intoxicated, including King Pentheus, as a bull. I mean, this channel that I'm doing is not only a literature channel. I'm trying to find the connection between classical literature and very relevant things, okay? But sometimes, in order to get there, we need to think in terms of pure literature. So, watch this clip I found of a pretty dry Apollonian lecturer making a really interesting point about disguise and masks and varying levels of identity and revelation. Pentheus is the based and reactionary fascist king who wants to purge degeneracy from his kingdom. Clip.
So Pentheus's war against Dionysus, his theomachane, literally fighting a god, requires that Dionysus show himself as a god. He's got to show himself as what he is. But Pentheus's war against Dionysus' followers, we're told, requires that Dionysus conceal himself and show himself only in the nature of a man. Now, in the course of the play, Dionysus is going to succeed in keeping Pentheus from launching his attack on the followers of Dionysus. But he seems never to give up his disguise. So the plot of the play suggests something like this. Pentheus is going to get punished for not seeing through a disguise that was designed by Dionysus not to be seen through, even by the people who worship him and believe in him. So you could say the general problem is this. The worship of Dionysus is somehow at odds with the recognition of Dionysus. The chorus worship.
And Euripides was the postmodernist of the ancient Greek dramatists. There are all kinds of self-aware, metaphysical, metafictional elements in this play. That is, it's very self-referential, the Bacchae. That these kinds of things that involve like winking at the audience, breaking the fourth wall, and so on. So we have to make sure that we ourselves in the audience aren't being deceived or tricked or missing anything. But it turns out tricking and deceiving is part of what Dionysus seems to do. It's 406 BC, and in real life, the Peloponnesian War has been raging for 25 years, and Athens is worn out. Euripides himself is up in Macedon at the invitation of the king. One last clip, quickly, from our boring but pretty smart lecturer guy.
The myth came to be of Dionysus as having been sewn away in Zeus's knee, the one we just went through in terms of the punning. This story about Dionysus is apparently due to the inability in human beings to hear the difference between homeros, with the accent on the final syllable, and homeros, so thigh on the one hand and hostage on the other hand. So you could say the story originates because of our inability to see that one sound can yield two meanings. The story originates because of our inability to see double.
Look, you guys, this play takes an hour to read. You can do that yourself. What I'm trying to do here is to think it through. This video is me trying to process what I just read. Read the summary on Wikipedia. What I'm interested in is the stuff that can't be summarized. In fact, that's another aspect of this ancient Greek drama stuff. It isn't merely entertaining. You can read this single play by Euripides and learn things you don't learn in political science, in psychology, in anthropology classes. Look at the tweet thread I posted yesterday that I did while I was reading the end of the Bacchae. You can sort of look through it with me here. The point is, this is like an infinitely rich play. You can learn real things. It's just that the things you learn in reading this play are kind of, they're difficult to summarize in prose because they happen in time. They involve secrets and changing and revelation and recognition, and like that's sometimes how real life goes, but it's again difficult to formulate, a nonfiction or philosophical sort of paragraph in an essay to describe this stuff. Now, this play begins with Dionysus arriving in Thebes, explaining how, yes, he was born to a mortal woman, one of the regular neighbors in Thebes, Semele, but Zeus was his dad, so he's a god. Maybe in the abstract, we can accept the idea of, a woman becoming pregnant by a god or something, but like, when it's one of our neighbors, I mean, how absurd is that idea? I mean, don't be crazy, right? But as I said above, Dionysus will not be denied his status as a god, and that demand is really the prime mover of this play. He wants to be acknowledged as a god. But even his own aunts question the story of Semele and Zeus, and so he determines that he will make basically all the doubters sort of lose their mind. They go off into the mountains and start doing bacchanalian stuff. I'm going to post some pictures as we go here. These pictures are of, the Bacchic rites, at least in the interpretation of many of the great painters in Europe. Important note here at the outset, this rollicking festival of nudity, sometimes said to be an orgiastic mystical feast, is a punishment. It's a punishment from the god Apollo. It is a function of Dionysus inflicting a madness on those who refuse to recognize his divinity. True Godwardites will feel here a need for some trenchant analysis of a challenging text. As Agadmator would say, feel free to pause the video here and find Euripides' next move. In the first proper scene of this play, two old men get together. The very famous blind seer, Tiresias the prophet, is one of them. I hope you know of him. The other one is an old guy called Cadmus. And there's a lot of interesting mythology to him also. He was the founder and first king of Thebes, and you should really read about him. But the point here is that he's a mortal, and he's very old, like Tiresias. And these two old guys are like fishing buddies. And Cadmus's daughter was Semele, the one Zeus impregnated to make Dionysus. So Dionysus is Cadmus's grandson. Y'all seen this famous painting by Gustave Moreau? Awesome painting. This is of Zeus and the dead Semele. He basically screwed her to death. Yes. Anyway, listen, pay attention now. These two old guys are like Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon in Grumpy Old Men, sort of, ridiculous but cute together. Tiresias shows up, knocks on his door, dressed all in fawn skins and ivies, dressed for the Bacchic dance. And Cadmus comes out to greet him, dressed the same. And listen, these two old guys dance a jig together. and they determine to go out to the mountains and do the Dionysian rites. And they set off, and almost immediately Cadmus stops them and says, "I'm only a man. I don't belittle the divine." Now, there are sort of maybe two interpretations here, like, are these two old guys already under the brainwash spell of Dionysus, or like, are they true worshippers of the old thing that Dionysus embodies, of kind of like, well, I don't want to, like the natural, like the impulse, the Dionysian, you understand? And I think it might be the latter. I think it is that one. Here you've got a simple old man doing the ritual, not questioning the ancestral customs. And Tiresias, the famous blind prophet, concurs. He says, "No, we don't play at theologians with the gods. We stay close to the hallowed tenets of our fathers, old as time. Nothing can undo them ever. I don't care how brilliant or abstruse the reasons are." You see, these two old, like wise guys are ready to pay their respects to the god of the dance. Why, you ask? Because that's what you do. You don't need reasons to dance. They don't have reasons. They know it's silly. Tiresias continues his speech here. Quote, "No doubt people will say I've got no self-respect, dancing, binding up my head with ivy, at my age. Well then, let them. Where does the god assert that only the young must dance, or only the old? He wishes to be worshipped by one and all. No discrimination." I hope you guys understand how perfect this is. There's a lot of like hemming and hawing in this corner of the internet about, traditions. But often the talk of tradition gets overwhelmed by philosophizing about traditions and giving reasons for the traditions. But guys, dear viewers, the god of the dance will not be denied. Do you understand? Oh, you think dancing is degenerate because you watched some red pill video about how slut shaming is actually good? Okay, you side with King Pentheus. You're determined to stop the dancing and drinking and the revelry. Everybody should be serious. But this is what I mean. Again, what is a god to the Greeks? Well, think of it as an element of the logos. Okay? We talk a lot about the logos on this channel, but the logos of cooking contains elements different from the logos of parenting, or from the logos of prayer, or from the logos of making your bed, or whatever, gardening. We say the logos is the order of things. It is reality itself, and it includes hard limits. A man cannot become a woman because that isn't the logos. But perhaps there is a logos of human psychology that demands, now and then, dance. You ask for reasons? There aren't any reasons. The reason is God said so. The grumpy old men get this. You can't negotiate with reality. But King Pentheus, and I think he's only like 27 years old, and many of you, I have to say, with him, you want to argue with nature. Dancing makes you uncomfortable because it's irrational. You can't understand the reasons for it, and you don't like to be out of control, and the women are better at it. Too bad. You either pay respects to the Lord of Dance, Dionysus, or he destroys you. Tiresias tries to talk Pentheus out of this mistake, right? The mistake is to try to legislate this element of human nature we don't love, like, out of existence. So Tiresias says to Pentheus, to the king, "This new god you think so fatuous, words cannot encompass the greatness of his coming power in Hellas. I tell you, Young sir, mankind has two blessings. The goddess Demeter is the one, Earth, that is, call her what you will, who keeps us alive with solid food. The other is Semele's son, who came afterwards and matched her food with wine. He it was who turned the grape into a flowing draught and proffered it to mortals. So when they fill themselves with liquid vine, they put an end to grief. You see, Tiresias knows that Dionysus is not really a new god, but maybe only a new way to honor one of the most ancient truths. Demeter represents the world, the body, the rules about eating and sleeping and reproduction and gardening that cannot be negotiated. But Dionysus is equally old, and where Demeter represents nature, he represents human nature, I suspect. Are we perfectly pleased with the rules? Do we love the way we were made? Is human nature perfect? No. Sometimes it's even sort of disgusting, right? But you must honor it, this God. Don't think I'm making this up. The chorus sings, quote, "Trying to know or meddle beyond the divinely established norm is wrong." And the phrase, "Do not kick against the goads," which appears 400 years later in the book of Acts, I'm pretty sure, or it could be Luke's gospel, appears here, followed by the phrase, "a man against a god." That is, don't kick against the goads like a man against a god. But, based and red-pilled Pentheus won't listen to all this. He says, speaking of Dionysus and his followers, "Track this foreign effeminate down, who infects our women with a new disease, befouls our beds. If you catch him, bring him here in irons." I know that most of my listeners love this guy, King Pentheus. But let me just briefly summarize the whole outcome of the play. Pentheus does arrest Dionysus, puts him in prison, but an earthquake happens and Dionysus gets free. Then Dionysus comes to Pentheus and basically invites him to see the festival for himself. The Bacchus rite out in the woods. And the king is so curious. He wants to see. So Dionysus says he'll take him to see. Now a servant comes in and reports some of what he saw out there in the woods, in the mountains. It's getting crazy. The servant says, "They ripped young cows in little pieces. They burst like a wave of birds over the ground. They tore like an invading army through the villages. They snatched up babies out of homes. The loot they loaded on their shoulders stayed put without being tied. Nothing tumbled to the ground, not even brass or iron. They carried fire on their flowing heads, and it did not burn them." Pretty interesting image there at the end, isn't it, Christians? Fire on their heads, not burning them? Sounds a little like Pentecost or like the burning bush. But anyway, Dionysus says to Pentheus, "How would you like to see their mountain seances?" And in spite of his moral disapproval, Pentheus is interested. "I'd pay a fortune in gold for that," he says. And Dionysus, now sort of teasing with him, I think, asks, "Why? What gives you such a strong desire?" Right? Like, why do you want to see the women dancing out in the woods if you're so against it? Okay, well, as Igad Mador says, what's the idea here? Well, Dionysus says, "Pentheus, you can come out, see what's going on, but there's one caveat here. You have to dress up as a woman to see it, or else they'll kill you." So the finger-wagging fascist who is going to purge his territory of degeneracy is so curious to see the Bacchanal that he's willing to dress up as a woman to see the stuff, these pictures. Well, he goes, and when he gets there, He hides in the bushes. He wants to just kind of voyeur the whole thing, it seems, but Dionysus suggests to Pentheus that he might get a better look by climbing up the tree. So he bends a tall sapling and climbs to its top. And though it allows him to get a better look down at the Bacchanal, the dancing women quickly spot him. Bacchus himself calls to them, "My maidens, look! I bring you the man who made a mock of you and me and our rituals of possession. See you punish him." And you have to really read this scene to enjoy it, but basically, his own mother, his aunt, and all the women of the town are there, and soon, quoting here, "the whole rabid pack were on him. There was a single universal howl, the moans of Pentheus, so long as he had breath, mixed with their impassioned yells. One woman carried off an arm, another a foot, boot and all. They shredded his limbs, clawed them clean, not a finger, but dripped with crimson as they tossed the flesh of Pentheus like a ball." So the final turn, wow. And there's lots of good paintings and stuff about, the death of Pentheus. You can look those up. The final turn in the play occurs when Dionysus, having led everyone who refused to honor him as a god out to partake in the mad rites of the Bacchanal, now sort of dispels the trance. Agave, the mother of Pentheus, has marched back into Thebes, proudly displaying her own son's head on her Dionysian staff, but thinking that head the head of a lion. She's out of her mind, Well, there's this incredible scene, I think I showed clips of it already, where she sort of begins to realize or recognize what she has done. In fact, Cadmus speaks with her before she understands. This is one of the reasons I think Cadmus, like a wise old man, did honor the god Dionysus and wasn't just put out of his mind by the brainwashing spell, because he understands what has happened. And remember, he didn't hesitate with Tiresias at the beginning to honor the god. Anyway, she presents him with the head of Pentheus, but he is naturally horrified. It's a person's head. And he says to her, "Oh, if you ever come to understand what it is you've done, you'll suffer with a suffering past belief. But if until the end you stay forever in the state you are, that is, out of your mind, this misery will be some miserable relief." What a great line. Here's how it plays out. I'll just read it here I think I have time. How's my time doing? Yeah, okay. Reading here. So she has just realized she chopped her own son's head off, basically. Well, actually, this is the realization. "Ha! What is there amiss in this? What call for sorrow?" And Cadmus gently takes her arm. "Turn your eyes first, please, to the skies up there." And Agave, his mother, Agave, looks up at the sky. "I am looking. What am I supposed to see?" Cadmus says, "Is it still the same? Or do you see some change?" And Agave dreamily says, "It is lighter than before, more luminous." Old Cadmus says, "And do you feel the same? The same unrest inside your soul?" She says, "I do not understand your meaning." And with a slight twinge, she says, "I seem to be becoming somehow aware. Something in my mind is changing." This whole time she's holding the head, right? Cadmus says, "Can you hear me? Can you answer me distinctly?" And then it says, from a long way off, Agave says, "Yes, but I've forgotten." "What are we talking of, my father?" He says, "What house did you marry into, child?" She, "You gave me to Echion, sprung from the dragon's teeth, they say." Cadmus, "And in your house, the son you gave your husband, who was he?" And Agave says, "Why, Pentheus, the son we had together. And Cadmus says, then whose face is this you are holding in your hands? She says, a lion's, or they that hunted it said so. And he says, now look straight at it. It does not cost you much to look. And then she gasps, what am I seeing? What am I cradling in my arms? Gaze at it. Study it more clearly. Oh, and then, oh, I see a giant grief, myself in agony. And it kind of like you can see it wash over her as she sort of looks and looks and looks and realizes finally what she's done. I also want to read the 6th choral ode, which follows the terrible realization of Pentheus' mother. It goes like this, quote, this is about 12 lines. Great Dionysus, breaker of barriers, son of the Father Imperial, vine-clad god and priest of the natural, sodden with light in purpureal cypress, glooms and mystical pines, now we adore and address you. Capture the nights and ambush the days of the impiously stupidly clever. And those that put faith in prowess of brain and the force of a master plan to change the world, and think they know better than the age-old wisdom of man. But us, O Bacchus, bind us with bryony, crown us with ivy, and let every peak of Cithaeron ring with the triumph of animal holiness. Animal holiness. What an interesting idea. I mean, there's so much more to this play that I haven't been able to get to because of time here, but I do want to say again, I understand very well that this idea doesn't seem to please anyone right now. The progressives are all planning to, woke the world and establish universal egalitarianism by their combination of medical and educational tyranny. While it seems the conservatives, all they can do is just react and play whack-a-mole and basically admire King Pentheus. Look, maybe it is possible to articulate a middle way principle so that people understand that they must honor the givens of nature, especially the givens of human nature, like it or not. We are made with limits, and we can only be pushed and restricted and legislated so much before the divine insanity comes to us. The infamous abuse of psychology as a tool of repression in the USSR, with diagnoses like sluggish schizophrenia, or, well, let's be honest, the abuse of psychology as a tool of repression in America, with diagnoses like ADHD and mania and so on. It seems so obvious to me that many of these diagnoses attempt to pathologize certain edges of human nature that institutions just wish didn't exist. You simply cannot put a man in a cubicle and give him garbage to eat and access to endless pornography on his phone and free music and video games and expect him not to snap once in a while and strip off his clothes and run howling at the moon through the streets once in a while. That's all I'm saying, once in a while. And when that happens, you can diagnose him and try and put him away, as King Pentheus would do. But if you do that, eventually the earthquake comes. Nature wins in the end. I've tried to work in a bunch of awesome paintings in this video. I hope you've seen some of them. There's tons more to look at. There are seriously hundreds of paintings of this one play and of this myth in the European tradition. I really urge you to spend one day of your life out of your 25,550 days, if you live to be 70, reading Euripides' play, the Bacchae, and then using the internet to learn about any of the elements of the play that baffled you, and then looking at the paintings of Dionysus, of the Bacchantes, the Bacchanal, and so on. It really is worth it. And It serves up a kind of insight that you'll never find in all your philosophy books. That's the end of this episode. The Patreon link is in the description, and I can't remember what the next episode will be on, but thanks for listening. I'll see you next time, family. Bye-bye.